A decade ago, when I was diagnosed with a life-threatening cancer, I took comfort in this form of meditation, just as I had as a boy. Instead of requesting the affections of a girl or an economic improvement in our challenged household, or the fading of the ghosts that seemed to haunt my father, always with an attempt to seal the deal by hitting 10 consecutive foul shots, I prayed to be healed. Please, God, please, I would whisper, then release the spinning ball with chemo-numbed fingers. One, two, three. Please, God. This is Kevin Breslin. What's doing? We're here today with the podcast to speak with a great author, Dan Barry, the New York Times columnist, the award-winning newspaper writer for narrative in 2016. He won the Mike Berger Award. He shared in the Pulitzer Prize. He's part of the American Society of Newspaper Editors Awards for deadline reporting. He's the author of several books, including This Land America, Lost and Found, and a collection of his This Land columns in the New York Times. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You know, you go way back with Jimmy, you said. How far back do you go?
I think I was in the womb. No,
You said when you were a kid, your father would encourage you to read them.
yeah, sure. I think that Jimmy was at our breakfast table pretty much every morning. And so I would come down to breakfast, my father would be there, and he wouldn't say good morning or I love you. He would just like toss the newspaper at me and say, read Breslin. So that's how I began with Jimmy Breslin, very early on.
And what'd you think when you were reading Breslin?
I think my earliest memory is how the hell did this guy get away with what he was saying? All right. And also the humor of it. He was hu using humor to challenge the people in authority. And he did it with such deftness and such laugh out loud imagery that it sounded like, one of the fathers in the backyard at a barbecue or something. Like he just let loose and it was all in print. And it was really remarkable for me. I was like, wow, you can do that? That's my earliest impression.
And that stuck with you? You figured, wow, I'm going to do this yourself, become a newspaper writer?
You know, uh, you know, Jimmy, I don't know for sure what got Jimmy into journalism, but with me, it was a little bit of the Irish background. My mother would tell stories as a way of navigating the world. Every trip to ShopRite was like a Homeric adventure. And my father was always raging against the system. He was a huge hater of Nixon. He was definitely a New Deal kind of guy. Didn't go to college, finished high school at night, not unlike your father in some ways in that sense. And so he was always raging against the system. My mother's always telling stories. And I was going to Catholic school and coming home and getting my ass kicked by, public school kids because I was wearing a silly uniform. And so I think as the years went by, it became kind of natural. You have the rage against authority or wanting to hold authority accountable, more likely. Wanting to hold the bullies accountable, right? But also wanting to tell a story and forming it all into a narrative. That's how I came to it.
Wow. You mentioned two things, because as you know, and it's interesting speaking with you because you're the first guy I think I've spoken to who wrote my father's obituary.
Yeah.
Very odd. It's
Yeah, it was
very
an
unique,
honor.
Dan.
It was an honor though. I mean, it was an honor. So,
But you wrote in the obituary about him that rage is the only quality he used to write newspaper columns, similar to how your father reared you. And the bigger thing, being an Irish American, Irish Catholic writer.
yeah. Yeah.
You and he are both the same there. He resented the Irish. You talked about it in the obituary.
Yeah, I don't know if he resented the Irish. I think he was quite proud of his Irish heritage, and
Yes.
that he hung around with, the Brendan Beans and the Moynahans and
Tip O'Neill.
right, and because there was a shared sensibility there. What he resented and what I think he argued against was this sense of Irish Americans who had forgotten where they came from, which is a cardinal sin. It was a cardinal sin for your father, it was a cardinal sin for Pete Hamill. You know, don't forget where you came from. And so what he saw, I think, emerging, particularly in the early years of the Nixon administration, all these Irish Americans who had, probably come up hard, forgetting how they had come up, and now embracing the Nixonian ideal of America rather than the New Deal or helping others. I think that's what offended him. As he said, I think, was it shopping mall faces or
Shopping
something?
center faces, you called it.
Shopping center faces. Well, I didn't call it, Jimmy did, but
Yeah.
what an interesting image. And you immediately knew that here, instead of people who had remembered the struggles of the Irish, that brought many of them to this country, now they're more concerned about what they can get at J.C. Penney's. So
Yeah. He used to tell me they betrayed their own kind. And I said, what do you mean, Pop? He said they want to be accountants and lawyers, and they've disregarded the word. Because you mentioned Brenton Bean, he'd read Yates. And like,
right,
I think he was really irate about that. But
right.
yet he was very similar. You go to church every Sunday, Irish Catholic, believe in the church, but yet be mad at them because he claimed that the Irish were racist.
Well, he experienced that. I mean, during the Crown Heights riots, right? A couple of cops helped him after he had gotten beaten up, and the cops were using the N-word and like wanting him to validate their racism in that moment. And here's this guy, what was he? He was in his 60s, I think,
Mhm.
bloodied, and he was not going to have it. He was not going to have it. And absolutely, obviously, you know, he would encounter some Irish Americans who were racist. I wouldn't paint with a broad brush, but that's what he
So,
resented. And he would sometimes see it with law enforcement.
yeah,
So
the cops told him, "Why don't you, stay with your own kind? Keep staying with them, Jimmy. See what'll happen to you." And that's what happened to him with
that's right.
Crown Heights with Giuliani, and they made fun of him. But yet, he was always a practicing Catholic, no matter what. And you yourself know with the church scandal, and his life was always so contradictory. He's Irish, yet they claim he's a drunk, but he's not a drunk. But yet he would go to church, even though there was the church scandal, and he'd say, but in times of crises, people always cling to their religion, no matter what.
Yeah. You know, the his
And that's with you also as a Catholic, Dan.
Sure. I think that you could do a whole podcast series on how Roman Catholicism um, informed Jimmy Breslin's outlook on life. Okay. Um, I would say mostly for good. I'm not talking about the Roman Catholic hierarchy so much as the ethos and the belief in, recognizing the humanity in one another and helping when you can. And so when he saw that being betrayed, in particular by the hierarchy, in the Diocese of Rockville Center, which was my diocese, you know, what did it tap into? It tapped into his rage, right? And the rage was rooted in his understanding of what the meaning was of Christ's message, right? And so when he saw that being betrayed, particularly, with children, which was just horrific. That's where the Jimmy Breslin Irish rage came out. The Irish Catholic rage came out because there was a betrayal there.
It's funny you say that. He used to walk around the Diocese of Rockville Center, your diocese, And there was a Mansion Murphy, I believe Cardinal Murphy lived there. Now the house had about 200 rooms. He used to walk around it all the time and count all the windows, and only one person lived there, and that had him nuts. You know,
Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder what his take was on Pope Francis, who rejected all the finery and the gold of the Catholic hierarchy for something simpler, you know.
a great man. You know, we were in church once. I was with my father, and it was a crowded mass, and there was a homeless person sleeping to the pew in the back on the side. And people walked by and like moved over, didn't want to go near the person. And JB sort of stared at him and looked, and we were leaving the church, and he went, hmm. He said, you know, you don't know. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you don't know. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, that could be Christ. You don't know. Be careful brushing past people. And I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
wow, Pop, that's interesting. So we had a real sensitive side about religion and decency. I mean, as a Catholic writer, it carried through in everything he did in life, but so did the Irish.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the other side with the Irish is they always call him an alcoholic. Breslin's a fat Irish drunk.
Well, you know, I mean, let's be honest. Jimmy helped create that persona. I mean, there's a whole nother podcast series on the many personas of Jimmy Breslin. But early on in his career, everything was rooted, not everything, but a lot was rooted around the characters he'd meet in the bars. And then once in a while, he would go off on a toot, but then he stopped, and that reputation continued to follow him no matter that he wasn't drinking at all. It was part of his this persona he had created, and other people wanted to use to knock him down, right? And also, as you say, you know, fit into the Irish stereotype.
Dan, I used to say, Pop, they said you're drunk. You're sitting here at 7 in the morning at your typewriter banging away. He goes to me, what? It's an act. He goes, and I realized he was right, because he was two-finger jabbing 7 days a week. He didn't have that much time to be drunk, Dan.
Oh, I know. You know, if you think about it, uh, extraordinary discipline, extraordinary discipline, you know, you know, he also used to be made fun of for, you know, how he dressed earlier in his life and everything, and, you know, being kind of a slovenly, you know, overweight, drunken hack, right? Are you kidding me? And reading the stories that he wrote on Deadline, you know, there's a discipline of the mind going on there, and he had to have set aside time to write this stuff. And you're right, 7 o'clock in the morning, he's typing away, and that's, you know, that's a different persona, right? Now it's serious. Now it's for posterity. Now this is now I'm about literature, even if it's like literature of the moment. I'm about literature. Screw all you other people. Have fun with the persona. I'm busy.
Absolutely, Dan. Thank you. That was very nice, because uh, it was 5:30 in the morning, 5:20. You hear boom, 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 bam, 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 bam. It'd be like, oh man, don't make a sound in the house. No talking. This is surgery. And
Yeah,
you weren't allowed to make sounds, Dan.
I know. I
Isn't
know.
that, isn't
Well,
that
I mean,
right?
I think the same thing was true in the newsrooms that he worked in. When he was typing, I think colleagues were afraid of interrupting him, afraid of going even near him. And on one
I
of
would
the
be.
on the cover of his first collection, the original collection of The World of Jimmy Breslin, or whatever it's called,
Yes.
on the back of the hardcover, and I have it. There's a picture of Jimmy in the newsroom, and he looks like a stone cold killer. He looks like a guy you do not want to even say hello to. And probably he was on deadline.
Dan, this is how we grew up. And let me tell you something. People tell me, oh, I want to be a writer. I'm going to be this and that. I look at them and think, you're crazy. You don't even know what it takes to get to this level. And I didn't even know what level he was at. I'm not here as some being effusive or fantasizing. We knew the grind and the grit and almost the pain behind it. It was not pleasant. And God forbid the writing was going bad. My advice is stay the hell out of the way. The neighbors stayed out of the way. They were terrified. Which leads me to another thing about him. But yet, he was a very sensitive guy. Now, he wasn't really that nice to other writers, in my opinion. In fact, I saw him be really bombastic to certain people. I'd rather not get into that. But yet, here's a guy like you, which is why I really wanted to talk to you. And probably I've heard you talk about it a little, but yet you didn't feel good in life. You got sick. And yet he reached out to you. Well, I've seen him not reach out to people.
Well, I think your father had a profoundly difficult childhood
Oh,
and was always, was very, very, very sensitive as a boy and I think as a man. And he had to develop this kind of shell, right? And so the shell then became part of his persona. And sometimes there would be flashes of him acting out or being dismissive of others. He could be very harsh. But on the other hand, there were many, many kindnesses that he did, and he didn't like trumpet it. He did it quietly. And I think it was his understanding of how to be a Christian. Okay. Not, there's many aspects to him. Some of it is informed by his spirituality. It was a quiet spirituality. He didn't brag like Bill Reel at the Daily News would brag almost about being, a sober Irish Catholic. That wasn't Breslin's style, right? And yeah, there's a famous story about how he reached out to me, and we can go through that whenever you want.
well, you had cancer, and
I
it
did.
was anecdotally, it was a nice, heartfelt story about you two, where he walked and talked to you, and he talked about you used a great line, the power of distraction. He distracted you.
Yeah, I don't even, I mean, obviously he was my number one hero in journalism, always had been. And so now I'm working at the New York Times and I'm writing um, uh, a column. Uh, and what a great gig that was about New York. And so I think he recognized my writing from that. Okay. And, so the New York Times has another Irish guy, but this guy, you know, is doing it. I think that's what he thought. And so I don't know how he found out I was sick. It could have been, honestly, I don't know how, but I then get a call and at the Times, and it's him, my hero calling me and saying, and all he says is like, "When are you going to that place?" And I didn't really know what he meant at first. And he says, that place. And I knew, then I knew he was talking about Memorial Sloan Kettering. And, very quickly, I told him when I was going to go. He says, I'll go with you. I'm like, what the fuck? You'll go with me. And so suddenly we've arranged to meet on this west side to go to Sloan Kettering because I have a procedure, and it's not a nice procedure. And I'm sitting there. I know what he looks like. He doesn't know what the hell I look like. And then here he comes walking down the street, and he had a turtleneck on. And I remember he looked smaller than what I imagined him to be,
Oh,
because for me, he was 6'6". He was like Cucullin. And so I said, Mr. Breslin, I'm Dan Barry. He says, okay, let's go. And then we slowly walk across the Central Park. And he's just telling stories, Kevin. He's just telling stories about like, boxers and mobsters and he's using the F word like it was oxygen. It was just like every other word was the F word. And so we're outside of Sloan Kettering waiting for my wife. Where the F is she? He's never met my wife, and he's talking like that about my wife. She'll be here. And as soon as Mary arrived, he never used another F word, right? And so I'll go with you. Thanks for coming across and thank you for the walk, Mr. Breslin. Thanks for the distraction. No, I'll go in with you. And honest to God, he went up. I had to check in. He's there with Mary. I had to get into one of those Johnnies. It was mortifying. I get into the Johnny and they direct me into this little room. It's about the size of a closet. And there's a couple of chairs. There's my wife and there's Jimmy Breslin. And I'm in one of those stupid Johnnies that, you have to tie in the back and I have to wear those stupid socks. And he had Mary laughing. A nurse came in. He had the nurse laughing. And it was extraordinary. And then, the joke is that the gurney comes and he's hovering over. The joke is I made room for him on the gurney. But he finally left. And then I had the procedure and it wasn't good. And then the next day I was supposed to be writing a column, but I was, feeling sorry for myself. And I'm walking around New York and he called me and said, "What do you got for tomorrow?" And that's another famous Breslin line, right? "What do you got for tomorrow?" And I said, Jimmy, I was going to take off. I just wasn't feeling it. He said, "Bullshit." He said, he said, "Look around. Look on the pavement. There's stories everywhere. Write it. Goodbye." That's what he said.
Boom.
And he was right. He called me out. Like, stop feeling sorry for yourself. What a privilege you have to be writing for a major newspaper. What a privilege you have to tell stories for the distraction of others, right? And so I went back to the newsroom and I wrote a column about, and I never used Breslin's name, about, how we're all in our own little movies in New York and walking across Central Park, and never mentioned, what Breslin had done to me, which was really a gift. It was a blessing.
Wow. That's an oh wow. Yep. He used to say anything but writing is easy.
There are days I agree with him. Yeah.
And he'd also say another thing, why I could see why he gave you a kick in the ass, if you will. Let's reminisce about tomorrow. In other words, Barry, get back to work.
Yeah.
That's all he
Yeah.
cared about, the job. You know that. The job. It was a job, not a fantasy. Of
No,
course,
I
you
think that,
paid.
no, but also when you're Jimmy Breslin, particularly in the 70s and 80s, right?
Mhm.
I think that he felt an obligation. Like people were waiting for him to uh, share his viewpoint. They were waiting for him to hold people accountable. They were waiting for him to help them understand difficult moments, whether it be, the shooting of John Lennon, whether it be AIDS, whether it be any of a number of things. And I think he felt the burden of that he had to chime in here. And he understood it was a privilege, but it's also a burden at times, but he met it. He
He
carried that
wasn't
burden.
afraid of controversy, Dan. I mean, I used to
Huh?
walk down the street, or a lot of times, your old man this, your old man that. Why doesn't he stick with his own kind as opposed to worrying about blacks or as he'd tell me, the permanent underclass, the haves and the have-nots? But you're right. He would do little things that no one would know about, like your story with you. Like he'd tell me, "Come on, we got to go." Where? We got to go to Brooklyn. Okay, we go to Brooklyn. He's got a Daily News envelope, right? Take this. We pull up to it was a welfare hotel. Just go inside, just say second floor. Hands it to me. Don't say a word. Don't talk to anybody. Just do as I say. Get me going into a welfare hotel, walk into the second floor. He would give this young mother, I'd knock on the door, I'd hand her the envelope, said Breslin Daily News, and he handed it to her. It was cash in an envelope to a young mother with a kid. I just looked, turn around, and leave, and didn't say a word in the car. And he didn't say a word. It was not big on the chatter, as you know. Um, but he'd always tell me the little things become what the big things in life were supposed to be. You just
Right.
do things. So he wasn't. You're right. There was two sides to my father, or to Jimmy Breslin, if you will. He wasn't just some tough guy reporter, this or that. He was also. I'm starting to realize after reading your book, which we want to talk about a little, that you wrote about him, which is the essence of why we have you here.
He wrote it. All I did was put it
Yes,
together.
you curated it, but it must have been quite a thing to understand another writer at your level.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty amazing. That was also an honor to put together. Um, and some people would say, well, why does Breslin deserve this? Isn't this for like, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Dickens or whatever, not Dickens, um, but are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? If you read the collection, whether it's these columns written on deadline or these more thoughtful columns and magazine stories, or the books, it's hard to choose the books. The editors wanted specifically his Watergate book because they thought that it had resonance today, and I think that was a wise choice. It was a wise choice. Um, uh,
Yes, it's called
and
How the Good Guys Finally
how
Won.
the good guys
And I
finally
pulled
won.
these out just because of your efforts. And the other book you talked about was The Short Sweet Dream of Eduardo Gutierrez.
Yeah, which I think is his master. I think that's his masterwork.
Yeah, it's about a construction worker in New York City who died because of a faulty construction site and basically a cover up and basically the story of immigrants. Again, him going back to the smallest thing. You know, Dan, when he used to do these things like go to Brooklyn to a murder or a crime scene or a fire, he'd always like to be alone. He'd always go to the other side of the street. There was nobody there. I used to think, wow, Pop, what are we doing here? There's no crowd. There's nobody. Who, Dan, don't take this the wrong way, but I was thinking to myself, where's the story? Where's the story sometimes? And he would discover things, you read it and go, how do you figure this out?
Yeah, no, I know. Well, I didn't know. I imagine that he did do that, right? And
We
I,
drove him. We know we were prisoners.
but I do the same thing. I don't like, and well, obviously the column he wrote about the gravedigger is another example of what you're describing, where the media scrum is going one way. And I tell you, when you're in a media scrum, there's a kind of safety in numbers, okay? So, yeah, everyone is saying, did you see that? Did you see that? They're all talking to one another, and so there's security there. And so I did this, and maybe because of Breslin, but what Breslin would do is reject that security, right? Reject that groupthink, and physically and psychologically remove himself from the crowd so as to see the scene afresh, okay? To see it differently than everyone else. What's the sense of having five columns in the New York newspapers that say the same goddamn thing? He was determined to step away from the crowd, see it for himself, see something no one else is seeing, and then write the memorable piece.
And how do you think you could teach that? I don't even know if you can teach this, Dan, not being a wise guy. I just don't. I think so much of it, like with you, with him, your father telling you just read and write. He very similar. It was almost instinctive. His, and by the way, he can be very cold to a situation he didn't like or bored him because you guys are around too much action.
Yeah, yeah. The thing, well, there's certain things you can't, first of all, you can't teach really what Breslin did, okay? So in many ways he was singular, okay? What you can do is you can talk about the economy of language, right? You can talk about how he made sure that every sentence was like a punch to the face. So all of this is by design. This isn't happenstance, right? This is by design. So he's read deeply. Uh, he knows Dickens, he knows Tolstoy, he knows Hemingway, right? He knows all of these guys. And so then what he's done is figured out his own style, which is an economy of language, sharp imagery, right? And a point of view, all written in a rhythm. There's a rhythm to it. There's a rhythm. There's a music going on here. So you can't really teach that. What you can do, and Breslin would talk about this, it's, go to the loser's locker room. That's what you do. You know, challenge yourself. Don't um, succumb to the security of the crowds, right? Don't listen to one another chattering about what the story is, and you're all nodding in agreement, and then you all go off and write the same goddamn thing. Force yourself to go to the loser's locker room. Force yourself to go outside. Force yourself to recognize the person who's watching the scene and ask that person what's going on. Don't rely only on public officials for a comment, right? Right?
You're
So
so right, Dan.
you could do a story about, about the housing situation in the Bronx in the 80s by talking to public policy experts and never going to the fucking Bronx, right? So what would Jimmy do? He would walk the steps. He would walk the steps, right? He would walk up, he would knock on doors, and he would interview the Eleanor Bumpers of the world. He was there. He bore witness. So that's what you can tell journalism students. But what the way he wrote, I don't know if you can teach that.
Boy, Dan, you hit four things when you were just talking that jumped in my head. Number one, when there was a story, he said, I'm on the go. Two, he says, I play the single, which means he writes it alone. And you talked about economy. He used to talk to me about that, and I didn't even know what he meant. He was telling me when you're on a story covering the economy of movement. I was like,
Mhm.
what does that mean? And I watched him once at a fire where people died. He snuck up next to the priest and the woman and the children that died at Brooklyn at the Wallbaum's fire. Before I knew it, he was like a cat. He was right next to them, leaning in. And he wrote a magnificent column about the fireman who died. And I was right next to him. I drove him. We were at David Berkowitz's at the hospital to visit Berkowitz, and it wasn't working out. Next thing you know, he has me at a fire with him. But he used the word economy of movement. He didn't move. Very few with the reporter pads. He just scribbled one line, and I wondered how he wrote these columns. And last but not least, he would tell me, luck is the residue of design. And he used to say,
Mhm.
what does that mean? I didn't know. I almost had to go look it all up and figure it out. But I think it's what all the things you just talked about. He would go there, he would watch, he would study, he would listen. And then, of course, he had the rare talent to be able to write it. Maybe that
Mhm.
does come from the Irish. I don't know.
Yeah.
The lyric rhythm as you're talking about.
Right. And luck. It's the thing that's often attributed to Woody Allen, the 90% of life is just showing up. And
Sure.
so he was determined to show up. And I've heard other stories where Jimmy would go to something where he thought there was a story and it wasn't panning out, and he wouldn't just call it a day. He would have to go somewhere else and find another story. There's nothing here for me. There's nothing here for me, he said to one reporter, and he left and he found another story.
Oh, Dan, you were so right. We would drive him. It wasn't working. I'm dead in the water. Dead in the water. He'd start muttering to himself. He'd be frantic. Pull over, get me a coffee, get me candy bars, Luden's cough drops. He would eat Luden's cough drops, chomping on them. We thought he'd crack his teeth. Do not criticize him unless you wanted to get murdered in the car. I mean, he was a half a tough guy. Pull over here, pull over there. Ah, freak it. He'd be cursing to himself, and somehow we'd go somewhere and he'd get something else. But
Hmm.
what I don't think this is being a deadline player.
Hmm. Hmm.
Most people don't understand the anxiety of something like that. You do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I don't think it's a business for the faint of heart, because it's not set up to be clear and to grow up with it. And your father was drumming it into you. Read, write, read, write. But I think you really have to have a certain something, life force, or else I would not play around in this field.
Yeah, so that's what he was doing though.
Reporting, Dan.
Almost all journalists are familiar with deadline pressure, okay? Um, but what Jimmy was doing was early on in his career was writing 4 a week, right? At the
Yes.
Herald Tribune, and then even later on, whether it was 3 a week, whatever the hell it was, the pressure was intense because he had, very lucrative contracts with these newspapers. And also, people expected to see Breslin's column on whatever it was, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, whatever it was.
Sundays.
He
Yep.
was expected. He could not blow that deadline. He had to come up with something, right? And sometimes there would be nothing there, and he would do one of his fanciful stories, and people would confuse that with fact. And even though it's obvious, I mean, it's so outrageous, he's just telling you a yarn.
Inucio.
But
Inucio. And the FBI accused him of bun burying,
right, but but
which is a
but
word of making up a fictional character.
But beyond, the deadline pressure that I think most journalists are aware of, there was you have to double that for Breslin, because not only does he have to meet these deadlines 3, 4 times a week, right? And that's why he's chomping on cough drops at like 2 in the afternoon, because he's got a file by night and he's got nothing. There's nothing in his notebook. I know that feeling. There's nothing worse. I didn't chomp on cough drops, but I know the feeling. And there's a slot on the page for your tortured prose. You got to deliver it, right? But beyond that, what he was doing uh, most of the time was creating literature on the fly. He was creating literature on deadline within hours. And that's what distinguishes him from all the other deadline hacks.
Well, that is very kind of you to say that. And in this book, he must have eaten, and all the members of my family will say it, maybe 100,000 Hershey almond bars, Luden's cough drops. I cannot tell you how much coffee, cigarettes, cigars, everything in order to make these deadlines. You're right. It's very difficult, and you brought up the good point. It's not all blood and guts, so he could have fun with the comedy because he said you would wear out an audience. He had to
Absolutely.
have a little fun with it,
Right.
and he
Yeah.
did have fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to shake it up. You can't be. And so what he's also trying to do is avoid predictability, and there are plenty
Yeah.
of columnists. You'll go to the columnist's page, or read the column, and you almost can predict what the columnist is going to say paragraph by paragraph.
Mhm.
So what Breslin was doing was shaking it up, and so that there would be always this element of surprise or reveal that you wouldn't find oftentimes with others.
It's funny you say that. Then other times they accused him, Jimmy's making it up. Jimmy's fake news. And I remember once I said, Pop, did you make it up? And he looked at me. He said to me, if I heard it, I wrote it. It's true. And
Mhm.
I could see there was no playing around here with me coming back. I'm saying, Pop, but oh, by the way, this or that, because he would tell me, why don't you do yourself a favor and go fuck yourself? He got rough here, Dan. And he would very, very tight with stories. Once I said, there's a great story. Yeah, let me hear it. And he's listening to me. And I said, but if you don't want it, maybe tell someone else. You don't tell anybody anything. Once a story's in the air, it's in the air. Keep your mouth shut. And of course, he grabbed it, but he was very protective of a story. I mean, you understand this.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Deadline, is a thirsty dragon. And so
Wow. Yeah.
you don't want little tidbits going elsewhere because you may need it.
He'd tell me once a story's in the air, it's in the air. Look out. Everybody will get it. Keep your mouth shut.
Right.
I mean, it was
Omerta.
almost like growing up around the Secret Service when it came to a story.
Hmm.
Most people don't understand any of this talk. This is unusual. That's why he said, I play the single.
Hmm. Hmm.
And someone like you or a few other writers, but particularly you know, you're very close with what you did here with all your curating and reading him and understanding him, but also him acknowledging your talent and your skill set because it's a tough business where I don't think it's a particularly nice business to be in, by the way. I never went into it because I thought to myself, wow, this is one rough game. You know,
Well, yeah. I don't think it's as well, I don't think it's as rough as when Jimmy was, uh, walking the streets in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but maybe it is. Maybe I'm just too much in it.
do you think it's going to hold up or is it disappearing before our eyes?
I think there's certain aspects of it that are under threat, that's for sure. But I think that the thirst for stories is eternal, and we use stories to understand the human condition, and that's never going to go away. And I think that there's always going to be a need for the power to be held accountable, and so I think we'll be around for a long time.
Well, yes, and I completely agree with you. And is there one little thing, one little funny thing that you remember about and you always keep with yourself? You're walking down the street, you say that effing Breslin, this or that, something.
About him,
I don't know, even something that maybe just you go forward with. The hell with him that you got from him of one little tidbit of humor. I don't know.
well, there are a couple of things. First of all, I remember um, he came to speak, I think, at St. Bonaventure University, where I went a long time ago. And I remember that I was in the men's room at the urinal, and he came in and was at the urinal next to me. And I thought I had just had a moment with a saint or something. That would be my version, two guys at a urinal, but one of them was Jimmy Breslin. So I remember that. Another time he was supposed to speak at NYU, and I was supposed to meet him in the lobby and bring him up to talk to a bunch of knucklehead grad students who I think almost none of them went into journalism except for me. Um, and he never showed up. So that was like, oh, well, that's Breslin too. And you could go in your mind, you can go, oh, the stereotype, oh, he went out on a bender or something. No, no. There was a story that had to be told. And so what's the balance here? Tell the story that matters or go talk to a bunch of grad students at NYU. I think he's going to go with the story.
You're an honored company there, and I'll leave you with two things. I get a call one day from Bobby De Niro screaming, screaming at me. I'm waiting on a corner. I'm waiting on an effing corner. I don't wait on MF corners for anybody. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? Your father, I'm waiting here. Where's your effing father? I'm thinking, why am I getting this call? So I quickly dial my father. He told me, fuck it, I'm busy. He hung up the phone. He left. I called back Bobby. Bobby was now beyond comprehension, nuts. I just said, I'm sorry. He hung up the phone. He left him on the corner. He told me I'm busy. To me, stay out of it. He hung up the phone. The guy was nuts, man. The guy was nuts. But I want to leave with something. Then the hell with him. It's more important your talent. You wrote something that I thought was beautiful. You wrote first off to my son that your father was my hero, which I thought was very important because I can't thank you enough for saying that when you signed the book for him. But we'll leave with your words, which I thought were majestic. But I keep seeking communion, like those older congregants on the other side of the church wall. I dutifully attend an early morning Sunday service that nourishes me in ways that others might not understand. For now, at least, when some of my friends rush out the door to make the 9 o'clock mass, I stay behind, looking for one more game, looking to get opened. Brilliant.
It's about basketball. I
No, it's
play,
about your life, Dan. And
I
my
know.
father would say, beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very
Dan,
much.
we thank you so much for your time. It's been very enjoyable. Keep writing.
All right, Kevin. Take care of yourself. All right. Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
very
Thanks for
much.
having me.
Thank you. Bye, Dan.
Gentlemen, one last second, just give it a beat. Dan, is there anything you'd like to plug, promote, anything coming up that we could, you know, put on our to find you, search for you, or promote what's coming up, or foundations?
No, not really. No,
Okay.
no. That's the New
Oh,
York,
charity?
the New York Times, all right, or I don't get any royalties from this. It doesn't matter, but if it spreads the word of Jimmy Breslin, do that. All right.
Well, again, we thank you so much, Dan.
All right. Hang
Are
in
you
there.
playing basketball anymore? You got a
I played last night.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty, I'm 67 and I get banged around, but it keeps me alive. So
You still banging down some foul shots?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can't leave for the night until you hit a few, like in a row. So, all right.
Yeah, we'll watch tonight. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. Say a prayer. Say a prayer for the Knicks. All right.
Bye,
Hang in there,
Dan.
guys. Bye-bye.